Good day. Good day, everybody. This is Yin Yang on morning number 1867. I think I plan to go to 2000 and then start counting the other way. And this is George J. Chanos's book, Millennial Samurai, Book 1. A Mindset for the 21st Century. This is Volume 1, Book 1. Millennial Samurai, A Mindset for the 21st Century. Now, today, I want to bring you several forms of wisdom. This one is one of them. He's got a lot of very wise things to say. Hopefully, that we learn the right things to do for ourselves, because knowing the right things to do is a form of wisdom. And then actually doing it and creating the magic action is virtue. In George J. Chanos's words, action is magic. We're bringing more virtue into the world. Um, we bring more virtue into the world with morsels of a thought at a time. Do something really good for yourself every day. Do something really good that takes care of yourself so that you're able to do good things for other people, and that you're able maybe to impart some knowledge that you think is really good and that you think is wisdom. Okay, so I'm going to start with him, and then I'm going to end with me. All right. Now, we read to here. This group is growing, and this stress and anger is building, ultimately fueling many of today's biggest issues. Okay, we're in the chapter. No way, really? Is that what it's called? I don't. Economic inequality. There we go. Economic inequality. We read up to that part last week. So we're continuing in that part where I'll read you the highlights that we got to the last time. It wasn't yesterday, it was last week. Economic inequality. America is experiencing the biggest income and wealth disparity in nearly 100 years. Low income earners now make less in real terms than they did in 1980. Americans now have nearly $13 trillion in total debt, and this was as of the time the book was written. The book was written in 2019, and most of this debt will never be repaid. Americans are working more productively than ever, while the fruits of their labor have accrued to corporate officers, directors, and their shareholders. This group is growing, and this stress and anger is building, ultimately fueling many of today's biggest issues. It's about money, unemployment, frustration, and hopelessness. We've seen protests all over the country. Groups like Antifa, the New Black Panthers, and white supremacists are on the rise. We've seen NFL players refusing to stand for the national anthem. Mass shootings are occurring with alarming and unprecedented frequency. This isn't about race, Donald Trump, or police brutality. It's about money, unemployment, frustration, and hopelessness. Tens of millions of people in America are desperate. They have no way out. Death by drugs and suicide for the bottom 60% of America's population have doubled since 2000. Sooner or later, this hopelessness and despair is going to find an outlet, quite possibly a violent one. Millions of Americans are already calling for the government to, quote, do something. Some are calling for a, quote, universal basic income. Democratic presidential candidate U.S. States Senator, Democratic presidential candidate United States Senator Elizabeth Warren is proposing a new annual tax on assets of the 75,000 wealthiest Americans. She has proposed a 2% tax on assets above 50 million and an additional 1% billionaire surtax, quote unquote, on households with a net worth exceeding 1 billion. Jeffrey Sachs, SACHS, a professor of sustainable development at Columbia University, proposes a single-payer healthcare system modeled on countries like Canada and Australia, overhauling the economics of higher education, better school-to-work transition programs, a wealth and tax and a wealth tax and an infrastructure program that would increase employment and training opportunities for workers. Others are calling for a clean slate to wipe out their debts. The idea of erasing debts to reset the financial system is not new. In fact, in the Bible, it's referred to as a jubilee. If you're unfamiliar with the term, it comes from the Old Testament, the book of Leviticus, chapter 25. Pope Boniface VIII proclaimed the first Christian Jubilee in 1300. Since then, it's been used dozens of times when anger among a population hits extreme levels. Carla Reinhardt, Reinhart, of Harvard University, and Stephen Roach of Yale have already advocated for a debt jubilee in the United States. London School of Economics professor David Graeber, Graeber, says, "We are long overdue for some kind of biblical style jubilee, capital J. It would relieve so much genuine human suffering." Paul Kedrowski, Kedrosky, a senior fellow at the Kauffman Foundation, a liberal think tank, says, "We need a fresh start and we need it now. We need a jubilee," is what he says. Kaufman is spelled Kaufman. A jubilee which wipes the slate clean for millions of the most indebted Americans and, quote, resets, quote, the financial system may become the leading political issue in years to come. Iceland used a jubilee in 2014 to restructure mortgages that were underwater. Croatia used a jubilee in 2015 to wipe out millions in customer debt. The idea of a debt jubilee has become the de facto solution when debts can't be paid. President Trump even suggested a debt jubilee for all of Puerto Rico's bond debt after Hurricane Maria. In 1841, the laws in America were temporarily changed so that debtors could be discharged of their debts without the consent of their creditors. We are reading from Words and Wisdom Wednesday. This is Millennial Samurai by George J. Chanos, a mindset for the 21st century. It must be understood that a jubilee does not come without cost. It would redistribute trillions of dollars from those who have invested and saved to those who can no longer pay their debts. The stock market would experience huge losses. Some banks would close. Many companies would go bankrupt. Millions would lose their savings overnight. Wow. And while the cost of a jubilee would be high, it must be understood that inaction also has a cost. Barbara Ehrenreich, Ehrenreich, who wrote Nickel and Dimed on Not Getting By in America. The not is in parentheses. Nickel and dimed on not getting by in America, is concerned by what she sees, the street protests and the increased anger toward immigrants. She says, people don't always act rationally when they see their own life chances diminishing. Millennials are now our country's largest generation, 85 million, outnumbering baby boomers, 80 million. They will have an enormous stake in whether or not a national debt jubilee is declared. According to a recent Harvard study, more than 50% of millennials do not believe in capitalism. How they address the issue of income inequality will have significant and lasting consequences for the global economy. Those who emerge as millennial samurai will play an important role in this debate. So, student debt is the next chapter. Millennials face the greatest student debt crisis ever faced by any generation. Student debt now exceeds all credit card debt. No other generation has had the level of debt that millennials now have, and millennials have even less opportunity to retire that debt than any prior generation due to stagnating wages and inflation. I remember that. I'm going to pause for a second. I'm going to say that I remember that Bernie Sanders said that all student debt should be forgiven and that that would make life easier for the students, for the graduates. It would really make a lot of sense to me that a student debt set would be forgiven, but I don't know about a jubilee. I don't know anything about that. Okay, back to the book. George J. Chanos says, a 30-year-old today makes no more money than a 30-year-old did 30 years ago. Unfortunately, prices have continued to increase during these 30 years, so the same salary buys far less. Rent in some instances is 10 times higher than it was 30 years ago. I could tell you that our house sold for 25 times, no, sold for about 40 times its original cost. Our home in San Francisco sold for 40 times its original cost in 1971. So 1971 to 2025 is 54 years. So in 54 years, it came up 40 times. That was absolutely crazy. Finally, says the author here, 45% of millennials get out of college burdened by that crushing debt, only to learn that they can't get jobs that require a college degree. So, where does that leave them? They've taken on massive debt that they can't pay off for a degree that doesn't enhance their earning capacity. Essentially, millennials have been screwed by a for profit educational system that prior generations created. It served those prior generations well, but the same cannot be said for millennials. Add to that the depressing reality that our educational system was designed for the Industrial Revolution and is ill suited to the technological revolution, and you have a recipe for failure. This crushing debt prohibits many millennials, capital M, from saving money for retirement, to buy a home, or to start a business. This has never happened before on such a large scale. Ultimately, as this situation becomes increasingly untenable, we will likely see more and more calls for student debt forgiveness. Something needs to change. The current for profit education system isn't serving us well. Certain services should not operate exclusively under a for profit model. Education is one of those services, healthcare is another. These are necessities of life that have an enormous impact not only on the quality of life, but on society as a whole. New solutions need to be developed to provide these essential services to more people at lower costs. Student debt may be one of the first issues addressed by millennial samurai, since it affects their generation most directly. How they address it will impact all of us. Modern monetary theory, says George J. Chanos, Millennial Samurai, a mindset for the 21st century. If you haven't heard about modern monetary theory, capital M, capital M, capital T, MMT, you will. It's the economic theory du jour, and it will be all over the news in the months to come leading up to the 2020 election. Harvard economist John Kenneth Galbraith, Galbraith, once said, the only function of economic forecasting is to make astrology look respectable. MMT is a new way of looking at the economy. It's very seductive. Everyone gets a job, and very different from conventional economic theory. Most economists believe that macroeconomic policy should stabilize the economy with the lightest possible touch, that it's better to let markets allocate resources. That's been the prevailing economic theory for decades, as popularized by Ronald Reagan's trickle down theory, the idea that less government and lower taxes will stimulate the economy. I'm not a fan of trickle down, says George J. Janos. We need more than a trickle, quote unquote, to help those who are struggling. But it is MMT. But is MMT the answer? Is it real? Relying on the fact that governments control their own currency, MMT argues that governments can spend untold sums to create jobs since they can always create more money to pay off debts in their own currency. They simply print it. The theory suggests that government spending can be used to grow the economy to its full capacity, fuel the private sector, reduce unemployment, and finance major programs such as universal health care, free college tuition, and the Green New Deal. Green New Deal is capitalized and in quotation marks. We are reading from Book One, Millennial Samurai, A Mindset for the 21st Century by George J. Chanos. Hopefully, to learn the right things to do for ourselves or even just to know the right things that affect us. Sounds great, Green New Deal. No need to focus on deficits, we are told. Focus instead on the private sector surplus that deficit spending creates. Congresswoman Alexandra Ocasio Cortez likes MMT. According to Business Insider, she believes that MMT can fund the Green New Deal and should be, quote, a larger part of the conversation. United States Senator and presidential candidate Bernie Sanders retains Stephanie Kelton as an economic advisor. She's a professor of public policy and economics at Stony Brook University and one of the primary proponents of MMT. I didn't know Stony Brook had a university. I thought it was University of New York at Stony Brook, but I don't know, maybe. I've been to Stony Brook. It's a nice place. New York. Um, Calton argues the best way to stabilize the economy and ensure full employment is to have the federal government guarantee every American a job. Those that agree with Kelton argue that increasing the deficit so that the government can invest in infrastructure and the labor force should not make anyone bearish on the stock market. It should make them bullish. Traditionally, economics have a very different view of money creation or money printing. They view it as being inherently bad for the economy. Paul Krugman, a Nobel Prize winning economist, says MMT's proponents engage in Calvin ball, C-A-L, C-A-L-V-I-N-B-A-L-L, a word, a game in the comic strip Calvin and Hobbes, in which players may change the rules on a whim. Larry Summers, a former United States Treasury Secretary, now at Harvard University, recently called MMT the new voodoo economics. United States Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell recently told Congress that MMT is, quote, just wrong, end quote. Many of us are old enough to remember learning about the Weimar Republic, in which the German government, Weimar, in which the German government, in defeat after World War I, printed money to pay its bills. And we know how that turned out. It resulted in hyperinflation. People needed wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy loaves of bread. More recent examples of governments running the printing presses to pay for the promises of misguided politicians, resulting in hyperinflation and economic collapse, include Venezuela, Zimbabwe, and Argentina. But MMT proponents point to Ben Bernanke's ballots of the banks in 2008 and ask, Why was there no inflation when Bernanke created $1 trillion by printing money to bail out the banks? You know, Bernanke's face used to scare the fad out of me. MMT proponents argue that by insisting on balanced budgets, we're handicapping ourselves in an underperforming economy, increased unemployment, and lost opportunities. They point to Japan, which in 2019 is running a government debt of close to 240% of their GDP and has not experienced runaway inflation. That that the inflation rate in Japan is currently 0.29%. It's not the printing of money that causes inflation. MMT advocates argue it's the lack of goods or labor or capacity that triggers inflation, they say. Only when the supply of labor, goods, or services becomes restricted will inflation become a threat, MMT proponents argue. MMT economists like Warren Mosler and Stephanie Kelton believe that the government should use its position as a monopoly issue of the currency to ensure full employment. And they have some support on Wall Street. So I'm going to read the rest of this next week and I'm going to ramble for the rest of the way today. I am going to say that what we need to do in this country is far more activity. We are all involved in a situation that is untenable. We cannot have people being randomly selected and killed on the streets. I think that there's a problem. Um, at this moment, we have had several people killed by agents of the federal government that used to be called Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Now they've gone to the center of the country. We're the border of that country. It's the center of the country, and they have killed a woman in her car. And some people claim, oh, she was her fault. She was trying to run him over. Actually, in the videos I have seen that were not AI'd, she was turning away and very slowly moving at a walking speed in her car. And the guy ran in front of her car and shot her through the windshield 3 times. At least one of the shots or two of the shots came through the windshield, and the other one came through the side window. And she's dead now. And there's another person who they say it could be AI that planted the gun on him, but either way, there was a gun on him without AI, and there was a man who grabbed his gun and pulled it out of his holster, and on his way away from the man, he shot into the ground, which fired a sound, and the other two agents holding the man decided to execute him. They shot him 4 times in the back, 6 times in the front, or 6 times, 4 times in the front, turned him over, and then shot him 6 more times in the back. So that was really random and horrible and decided ahead. If you hate politics, get your head in gear for knowledge of a crisis going on right now. Be aware. I have a friend who, I hope she doesn't mind my saying this, and I'm not going to say her name. And I said, you've got to be aware we're about to lose our democracy and things are getting dangerous out there. And she later thanked me and said, I am scared now. And that's the important thing, is to know what's going on. Whether you're scared or not, you've got to do what you got to do, even if you're afraid. You just keep on doing it despite the fear. Remember that quote? Okay? We're going to do what we have to do. Heather Cox Richardson says that we can go and find out our strengths. We decide our strengths, then go find a group that's doing that, and or start your own group by talking to one person and another person. And then pretty soon everybody gets a big group of 10 people together. That's what by Heather Cox Richardson. Okay? Talk to you later. Old Kinderhook.